think there really are just three highlights I want to make sure that you take from that. What I really want to do is spend most of our time not talking about the challenges facing our state, because I think it's very clear going around the table what they are, but really talking about the solutions of how we're going to make this place all that it can be. And I like to have it as interactive as possible with as much questions and answers. The three key takeaways, I think, just from that bio, the first is to know the core of my life is surrounded with my family. My wife and I married for 20 years, 5 children, 4 teenagers in my house. Just last week, we now have 2 drivers, so if you're in Fairfield County, watch out. And we had my first son have a 15th birthday, so there's always something going on. Second thing is this idea of the promise of the American dream. The basic premise of this country, the reason that you're here, everybody's here, is the idea that every generation can do better. That when you work hard, you do better than your parents, you do everything possible to make sure your kids will do better than them. That's why this is the greatest country in human history. I am concerned that that is no longer true here in Connecticut today, and that we're in danger of breaking that promise to ourselves and to our children. It's unacceptable. That's why I'm running. The third thing is my business background. So as we think about the choice of how we're going to fix this problem, one of the key distinctions, and we'll talk about what's different between the different candidates for governor, is do you want somebody who's been a career politician, who's been doing this for a long time, or do you want a business person who's a political outsider, who comes with what we talk about is outside-the-box thinking to deal with these issues, who thinks about this as a business problem with our families and our businesses as customers, and that's my background. The other is to know that my background is as an entrepreneur, somebody who started a small business, who faced a horrific challenge at the beginning, that was successful in doing that, growing a business, and I view that's exactly what we need here. We have a financial crisis that's threatening our state. Who can deal with it and who can grow? Let me just talk about for a moment what it is I think we need to do here, and then I would like to open it up to our questions. So I talked about 2 key responsibilities for our next governor. The first is to save the state from a financial crisis that is threatening our families and businesses. And I don't say that lightly. When I started my business in 2008, it was the start of the worst financial crisis in 70 years. What we are facing now in this state is, I think, something quite similar. The most enduring legacies from our governor, Dan Malloy, is the next governor receives an $11 billion budget deficit over the next 4 years. It begins with $2 billion in year 1, and it increases by $500 million each year to be $3.5 billion in the 4th year. The reason for that at its core are these massive unfunded retirement liabilities. We have over $100 billion of unfunded retirement liabilities and debt that have accumulated over decades, as politicians and union leaders have collaborated in making promises they could not keep with money they did not have. The first responsibility for our governor is to talk about this honestly and to deal with it responsibly. And we are the only candidate on either party to have done so. We put out on our website a proposal to deal with this, talking about it in a way that no campaign for governor is talked about in this state or in any state. Just to give people a sense of the scope of the challenge here. If you are in the private sector and your pension fund were funded at below 80%, you would be sent to the Pension Fund Guarantee Corporation to be sent essentially through bankruptcy. Because not only is there not enough money today, there will never be enough money to get you out of that hole. In Connecticut, our pensions are funded at 30%. That means if we're talking to the 3 of you here, there's almost enough money for 1 of you, and for the other 2, there is 0. I view that this situation is unfair to everyone. It is unfair to our state employees and retirees who have been promised benefits that we've never been able to pay and never will be able to pay. It is unfair to the taxpayers around this table who are being forced not only to pay for but to guarantee benefits that you cannot earn yourself. And the third is it is unfair to our children. Since we passed the employee cost sharing agreement, we have never funded it a single time. And so I gave the speech announcing this plan here in Norwalk at Tracy Elementary School. And I did so because that's a school where 85% of the students receive aid for school lunch, and we've never fully funded their education. I talk about this issue the same with whomever I'm talking to, whether a Republican Town Committee meeting, whether it's a Rotary group, or whether it is I'm at Open Door in Norwalk, a homeless shelter, and the security guard says, I'm a retired state employee, you're the guy who's going to take away my pensions. I said, no, I'm the guy who's going to save your pensions. We have a detailed plan. What we're going to do is effectively a one-time buyout. We're going to say you've been promised 100 cents on the dollar. There's only 30 cents there. We need to do better, and we will. We'll make a one-time contribution of money, of state assets, and if you join us as partners in this and give us full flexibility to pay you the same amount as in the private sector, to give us the flexibility to have the right size workforce, then we will let you share in the upside of the future financial performance of our state. That's a deal that we are going to put forward. That's a deal that we expect to make. But while all that is protecting ourselves from the downside, what's the upside? I look at this state as like some of the best investments I made in my career, which were businesses with great potential that have been horrifically mismanaged. In some cases, they got their balance sheet into trouble. And what you're looking for is strong leadership that's going to come in, that's going to clean up the mess, and is going to rebuild our strengths. So what are our strengths? For decades, we attracted people and businesses here. From 1950 to 1990, this state boomed. As we went around the table, we talked about what were the things that brought people here and what are the things that are driving them out now. And there are three things. The first, our location. We're right next to New York City here. We're between New York and Boston. We're the gateway to New England. We have 600 beautiful miles of coastline. Second thing, strong schools and a highly productive, trained, educated workforce. The third thing used to be affordability. We used to have lower taxes. We used to have a lower cost of living and lower cost of doing business. And when we did all those three things, people were coming, businesses were coming. It was a booming state. We have lost our way in all three areas. And so we have put out plans for all three of them. And let me walk you through, and then we'll go to questions. So the first is cutting taxes. So I grew up in Massachusetts when it was known as Taxachusetts, right? And it was losing families and businesses just like we are losing today. And they have had three Republican governors. They had Weld, they had Romney, and now they have Baker. And now their taxes are lower than ours, and the logo of GE is on the uniform of the Boston Celtics. You hear from other candidates for governor, everybody says we're going to cut taxes, we're going to cut taxes. In a couple of cases they say we're going to eliminate the personal income tax. What we're asking everybody to do here is do your homework, understand what do the numbers mean. Two candidates, both Stefanowski and Bowden, say we're going to eliminate the personal income tax. Not a chance. The numbers do not work. We have a $20 billion budget deficit. The personal income tax contributes $9.5 billion to it. Are we going to cut the size of the government by 50% and then for the budget deficit another 10%? Are we going to cut government by 60%? This is an empty promise. Sounds good, but I'd like to see how you would do such a thing. Sounds good. The numbers do not work. And so we got into the problems that we have today by politicians making empty promises. In this case, you got both a politician and a guy who says, I'm different as a businessman, making the same empty promises. And for the two guys who have been mayors, look at their track record. Their mill rate has gone up every single year they were in office. So I say is do your homework. So what we propose, $3 billion of tax cuts. I view we have to cut taxes because otherwise you're going to move. People are moving to Florida, they're leaving, they can't afford it. We take our personal income taxes, 7 brackets to 3. First $10,000, you pay 0. If you're paying 4 or 5 or 5.5, you go down to 4, and the top bracket is now 5%. We're going to eliminate the estate tax. It's going to be a big deal for people leaving for Florida. We're going to eliminate the business entity tax. Any of you guys who run a business, from the second you start your business, you start paying a tax. And we're going to reduce the corporate income tax rate to 5%. Put that all together, it costs $3 billion. How are you going to pay for it? $2 billion of spending cuts. We're going to economize, privatize, and prioritize. The Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth identified $1 billion in cost savings, assuming you can't change the state employee contracts. When we change those contracts, you're going to save $2 billion. And our tax code today is a series of special interest giveaways. We're going to get rid of those giveaways, and that's how we're going to make the numbers work. Second piece, let's talk about our location. So our location is only valuable if you can get here. People are stuck in traffic. That strip of I-95 between Stamford and Bridgeport is the third most congested in the entire country. We lose 37 million hours a week stuck in traffic. I spent time with a woman who lives in Fairfield, who had a job in Greenwich. She was there for 20 years. Her kids are now in high school and she needs to drive them in the afternoon. She had to quit her job because it takes her 2 hours to get each direction. Are trains slower today than they were in 1970? Why is that? Some of the bridges were built in the Taft administration. They look like they're over 100 years old because they are over 100 years old, and they've never been fixed. The debate in Hartford is broken, and that's where I want to leave you with before I open up to your questions. You have Dan Malloy saying, we busted your transportation trust fund. There's no money left. And the only answer, he says, he went to New Canaan, another community that cares about their trains, and said, we're going to cut your train service unless you agree to tolls. And not just any tolls, he wanted a blank check and wanted to make this the most tolled state in the country. And the Republicans said no. They said, Tax Freedom Day is the longest, the latest of any state in the country. We're working for the government longer than for anyone else. And we don't trust this government to actually spend the money in transportation. You remember the money was supposed to go for education, for the environment, never goes there. They also don't believe we're going to spend it efficiently. In this country, the average mile of highway in the average state costs $180,000. Here in Connecticut, $425,000, more than twice as much. But what they haven't said is how we're going to fix it. Because the roads, we have to make them faster. The trains, we have to make them faster. This part of southern Connecticut is the largest population center in the country without regular commercial air service. Our idea is to attract billions of dollars of private investment to rebuild our trains, roads, and airports. We have a plan to get the train from New York City to Stamford in 30 minutes. Bridgeport, 45 minutes. New Haven, 60 minutes. It will be game-changing for every of the towns here. We're going to add 1 or 2 lanes to I-95, and we're going to reverse them during rush hour. We're going to turn Sikorsky into a major regional airport. How do I know that we can do these things? Because I have owned the shares of companies that do exactly that. If you go in Europe, in Asia, in Canada, the airports are almost all run by private businesses. The roads increasingly run by private businesses, and increasingly the trains. These are multi-billion-dollar projects. They require the top engineering talent. We want them to be delivered on time and on budget. Remember, I grew up in Massachusetts. Anybody remember the Big Dig? It was a big disaster, right? So it was billions of dollars over cost, years and years late. And yeah, I'm out driving on the Merritt every night. You got 6 guys watching 1 guy fill in a hole. It's out of control. It's outrageous, right? And so we're not going to do that. When you do it with a private-public partnership, they don't get a cent until they complete the project. It's on time, and it's on budget, and it's up and running. Their risk, not our risk. That's what we talk about as outside-the-box thinking. I look at this state, and I see the exodus of people and families, and I say, with this kind of thinking, with this kind of leadership, this place is going to take off like a rocket ship. Let me answer your questions. Please.
This is going to be an interesting primary because you've got a couple of guys who are experienced politicians, and you have a few businessmen. So how are you going to answer the folks that say you don't have any political experience?
Yeah. So what I would do there is, the first thing I just say in terms of framing this situation is, we've been doing the same thing for a long time, guys. We've sent career politicians to the governor's mansion in both parties, and this is where we are. Time for a change. In 2016, the people in this country said we are on the wrong track. And for a lot of people, their first and second choice was either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. And they just said, what's going on? It ain't working. We need somebody to do something different. And for whatever you may think about the president, of his latest tweet or his latest this or that or the other thing, the guy is delivering results where it matters. Our taxes are lower, the regulations are lower, and if you don't live in Connecticut, the economy is booming. And what I would say is, for any of you guys who ever seen the movie When Harry Met Sally, you say, I'd like some of what she's having. Right? So That's the kind of thing that we need in our state. The second thing that I would say in terms of experience doing this, I look at this and I say, I'm very practical. I ran an investment business. Every day we were either losing money or making money. And if we were losing money, we needed to do something different so we could stay in business to make money. So I say, where have I seen it before? So let me give you 3 examples of states that have been run by business people who had no experience in the public sector. One of them is Charlie Baker in our neighbor Massachusetts. He is a Republican, he's the most popular governor in the country, and his state is booming. I take you to Florida, a state that people seem to view as this is a great place for us to go, run by a guy named Rick Scott. First time he'd ever run for political office, he's the governor of Florida. The place runs spectacularly. The example that I would say is closest to ours, though, is Michigan. If I took you to Michigan in 2010, you'd say, wow, this is a place even worse than Connecticut in 2018. This is a place right after the financial crisis. You had double-digit unemployment. You had the auto industry had just gone bankrupt. You had Detroit verging on the edge of bankruptcy. And he was introduced to the public as one tough nerd. And he said, the end of happy talk. We're going to tell it straight. We're going to reform the retirement benefits. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to cut regulations. And what's happened? Michigan is the great turnaround story of the 21st century. They have below 4% unemployment. They have the second fastest manufacturing growth in the country. They have one of the plants that left Michigan for Mexico, one of the auto plants, is coming back to Michigan. And the city of Detroit, where if you had been at a Tigers game before, they would have said, you better leave before the last pitch because your car might not still be here. It is now one of the hottest cities in the country with real estate investment and kids pouring in. That's the kind of leadership that we need here in Connecticut. Please.
You mentioned GE. We lost GE.
Yes, we did.
We lost a lot of revenue.
Yes, we did.
What about a tax incentive, some type of incentive program to bring companies to Connecticut?
So my view with this is we need to create an environment that is attractive for businesses and families without having to bribe them. Okay? So what we have in this state is what they had in Michigan. In Michigan, when Rick Snyder took over, it was so horrible. They didn't even have a corporate income tax. They actually had a revenue share with their businesses. So whether you made money or not, you had to pay taxes there. And the only way that they could keep businesses in Michigan was to give them special deals to keep them here. And that's the case in Connecticut now. Our taxes are so high and so uncompetitive. Our regulations are so burdensome. This was the conversation about it's even easier to do business in New Jersey than here. I mean, that's what you said. That's not a great place to do business. And I talk to companies and say, we do business in 47 states around the country. Connecticut is one of the only 3 where we can't make it work. So what we need to do is we need to fix that, because the strategy of bribery doesn't work. This is what Dan Malloy did when he came into office. He talked about the first 5. These were the companies that he put specials deals in. Well, as soon as those deals are going off, they're heading for the exits because it's unsustainable. We need to create an environment here where the taxes are low enough, where the regulations create the right business environment, but critically, we also take advantage of our great location, and we also provide a phenomenal workforce. Because we're not going to be as cheap as they are in Florida or in Texas, but you know what? We don't have to be. The economy in Massachusetts is booming, and they figured out the right formula. They have a very talented workforce. They bring business and educators together. They don't do, and they brought their taxes down. If we do those things, plus we make this an even more attractive state to do business, we've seen how the state could boom before, and I'm sure we can boom again.
Back to the transportation issue. We should be giving incentives for these big companies to ask their employees to take mass transportation. I mean, is that, because there will always be more cars, there will always be more people. Apparently, maybe not in this state, but you know. So even putting more lanes in, will that, or switching the lanes as we have discussed, is that going to resolve the problem we have here? Or should we really be just pushing people, giving incentives to take mass transportation?
So my view with this, as with everything, is let's get the market to work for us. And if we are providing the quality of train service that I expect we're going to be delivering, you're going to get a lot more people taking those trains. So we get the train from New York City to Stamford in 30 minutes. If we can get it to Bridgeport in 45, we can get it to New Haven in 60 minutes, a lot of people are going to take those trains. And when we get more people taking those trains, that's going to be how we pay for the investment. So again, this is one of the differences, is that when you get more people to use it, that's how you do better. The places that are booming are the ones with the low taxes because they're attracting more users. And so I don't think that we're going to need to give any kind of special deals. What I think we need to do is to create a business case so that we deliver the type of service that people are going to be excited about. And when we do that, we're going to get more people there. And in terms of the roads, we can run them much more intelligently. Part of the challenge that we have here is related to some of the interchanges are run in a foolish fashion, and getting the additional lanes and reversing them during rush hour are going to get the roads moving again. When we put them all together, it's going to be a very, very powerful combination for us.
Actually, 4 quick questions. First is, if you do the lane change idea, how much time do you think it would take to implement? Second question is there any consideration to try and expand water taxis? I know in New York, water taxis are becoming big. Everyone's traveling on the water now because it's so much faster for some areas and avoid highways. And then, well, I can't remember my third, but my fourth question is, I know there's obviously a big deal right now about the Supreme Court, and Cuomo's running commercials left and right that, you know, if anything ever happens to Roe v. Wade, he'll try and do as much as he can to make New York, you know, a unique state that will control its own destiny for that aspect. And I don't know how you felt about that feature.
Sure. Okay. So let's start with the amount of time that it'll take to fix the roads. If you have the Department of Transportation running it, you should be very scared. You know, based on what goes on with the repairs currently, it'll take forever. That's why we need to have it done with a private-public partnership. And the way that you set this up is a contract where you say you don't get paid anything until you deliver the service on the other side. And when you give that kind of incentive, it's going to get built a lot faster, believe me. So that's how you set this thing up so it can get done quickly. Okay? The second is in terms of the water taxis. So in this case, as with everything, I look at this as what does the customer want? So I was in Bridgeport. I look at our cities. It's very important for us to revitalize our cities. We have between Bridgeport, New Haven, Stamford, Hartford, we've got some significant potential. And I think here in Norwalk, we've got some very interesting potential in what's happening in an urban area. Younger people in particular are interested in living in areas with some more density of population, where there's more things going on, and I think we have significant potential there. For Bridgeport, one of the things they have, it's a port, not surprisingly, and there is ferry service that goes there now. It's fairly slow, and so I've talked to the people that have developed Steel Point Harbor, people who have talked about potentially bringing in an entertainment and gaming complex there, about ferries. And what they have found is, if you look at this around the world, if the boat service, to your point, if it leads to being faster, then it's a winner. If it's slower, it's a loser. And so it depends on how fast we can get the train there. So we probably can get a high-speed ferry from New York to Bridgeport in about 45 minutes. And so if the train were still as slow as it is today, it probably would be interesting. If we can get the train there in 45 minutes, it's probably not as interesting, except during the summer, where some people would probably enjoy being on the water, and it would be sort of part of the whole summer experience. The last piece in terms of the Supreme Court, its implications, and specifically related to Roe v. Wade. So for the Supreme Court, it makes a big difference. So before we get to Roe versus Wade, let me talk about it in another area. So we had a very important Supreme Court decision called the Janus case, which was decided just a week ago, and it was critical for state employees. State employees, since 1977, when the Supreme Court made another decision, have been forced to join the union and forced to contribute union dues to their union leadership that has been used not only to negotiate wages and benefits, but have been used for political purpose, and have effectively created one-party rule in our legislature since this was passed. It has been an absolute unmitigated disaster. And the Supreme Court made a critical decision reinforcing First Amendment rights. It drew upon the precedent of protecting the right that you don't have to pledge allegiance to the flag, of saying you cannot be forced to do this. This is a critical decision because it means for the first time, when we look to make changes in our employee union contracts, we're going to go directly to the members and not just to the union bosses. Critical, critical difference. When we look ahead to the changes that we need to make going forward, and we're going to look to reach a collaborative agreement, we also need the state employee unions to know that if they are unwilling to join us, that we have legal recourse to act unilaterally. There is a clause in our Constitution protecting the sovereignty of each state. We go back to the constitutional formation of this country. It was a series of sovereign states that came together. And I am confident that when Judge Kavanaugh becomes Justice Kavanaugh, we will have 5 votes on the Supreme Court that will agree that if a state needs to make these changes unilaterally, it absolutely has the sovereign power to do so. And that's very important because the unions have now seen the significant erosion in their power from one Supreme Court decision. I do not think they're going to want to risk losing this as well, and that will be critical for our bargaining leverage. In terms of Roe versus Wade, which was your last
I
one.
just want to say 5 minutes. I don't want to rush you, but.
No problem.
Okay.
So in terms of Roe versus Wade, so first I think it is highly unlikely you're going to see a change even with a Justice Kavanaugh. If we do, this state passed legislation in 1991 effectively making Roe versus Wade the state law. And so that's what would happen if it were overturned at the federal level. I support that legislation, so there would not be any change in the laws here. On that point, I don't think we have everything right. One of the areas that I think we have wrong is a lack of parental notification. We have parental notification laws in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, so our neighbors. I think if a minor girl needs to inform their parents about getting their ears pierced, I think it is not unreasonable for parental consent in this area as well.
You've won the primary, you just got elected governor, and the House, the legislature, and the Senate are all Democrats. How do you deal with that situation?
Well, to begin with, I think the chances that they're all Democrats is going to be pretty low. If there are majorities in both houses of the legislature. I will be honest to everybody here, that's going to be a problem. So if you want to bring about the changes that we've talked about today, not only do we need a new governor who is going to do what we've talked about, we need a governing majority in that legislature. If I point to both Michigan and Illinois, both cases, they hired as their governor somebody who looks like me, somebody with a business background who looked to make these kind of changes. In Illinois, they continue to have a Democratic legislature, and it is on the road to disaster. And in Michigan, they elected a Republican majority, and it is the greatest turnaround story of the 21st century. And so it is the responsibility of everyone around this room to make sure that that's what we have happen here. With that, let me close on a final note here, having perhaps exhausted the audience here. What I want to leave you with is a final image about leadership. Because ultimately, in our choice of our next governor, it is about leadership. What kind of aspirations do they set for us, and will they be able to accomplish them? And a contrast for me growing up, I think, gives an example for what we need today. When I was growing up, I remember Jimmy Carter addressing the nation from the Oval Office in a beige cardigan. And he did so shortly after the spike in oil prices, after what was going on in the Middle East. And he turned to the thermostat, and he turned the knob of the dial, and he said, "It's time to learn to live with less." This is what Dan Malloy said to us just a couple of years ago. You remember that moment. It was awful. There's nothing more antithetical to this country. The idea is that it's always supposed to be better, and he said, this is the new normal, learn to live with less. Ronald Reagan wore a great suit. He wore a great tie. My 4th child, Charlie, I just taught him how to tie a tie. And we had a diagram of how to tie a Windsor knot. I hadn't seen that one for a long time. But you may remember Ronald Reagan wore a full Windsor, and it was a beautiful tie. And he said, it can be morning in America again. He said, I am not content with containing communism. We are going to win the Cold War. My 5th child William, who's 9 years old, asked me just a few days ago, Dad, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? And he likes video games. So he said, would you live in Japan? We have friends in the UK. He said, would you live in the UK? I said, William, I would live right here. I would live in this country, in this state, in this house. I am here in Connecticut by choice. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was living with my wife in New York City. I came to this state to get a job. I chose this state as the place to raise my family with my 5 children. And I chose to start a business here because it was the best place in the country to live, work, and raise a family. With strong leadership, with your support, it can and it will be again. Thank you very much.